Today's video will be a competition recap of the 1975 IFBB Mr. USA and Mr. World, which was held in the world's most famous arena, New York City's Madison Square Garden. But before we get into it, I'd like to give a little bit more background information on the IFBB's amateur division and the history of these two well-known titles. Now, like I've pointed out in a previous video, eventually the IFBB and AAU partnered up, which ultimately gave birth to the National Physique Committee. But before all of this, the IFBB had ran their own amateur circuit known as the AABA, which stood for American Amateur Bodybuilding Association. So the AABA had both coasts represented, with Franco Colombo in charge of the West and Tom Minichiello and Peter Vita taking care of the East Coast shows. Now, while I was researching through some old issues of Muscle Builder, I actually found a great article written by George Kay, and he went on to explain that the IFBB's Mr. World title was the East Coast equivalent to the IFBB Pro Mr. Universe. And that's not to be confused with the World Amateur Bodybuilding Championship, which was also dubbed the Mr. Universe. And all the while, there's also the NABA Mr. Universe out there as well. I know, it's pretty confusing, but anyway, a few months prior to the Mr. USA, Franco Colombo had successfully promoted the Pro Mr. Universe competition in Los Angeles along with the IFBB American Bodybuilding Championship, where rising IFBB star Robbie Robinson won the title, which actually qualified him for the upcoming Amateur Universe in South Africa. So, with two major shows on the West Coast, the AABA introduced a new national title that would be equivalent to the IFBB America, and that was the Mr. USA. With this being the first Mr. USA, it was instructed to be co-promoted with the Mr. World title. So East Coast directors Vita and Minichiello, or more professionally known as Vitman Productions, used Minichiello's Mid-City Gym as headquarters for the promoters, and in the end they were able to book the Felt Forum at Madison Square Garden for the occasion. So now that the IFBB had two major amateur competitions on the East Coast, and most of Weider's top guys living out west, Joe actually flew out some competitors like Robbie Robinson, Dave Dupree, Roger Callard, Denny Gable, and plenty more. He even flew out photographers Art Zeller and Jimmy Caruso. But the only West Coast guy that drew the short straw was Kent Kewen, who had to make his own arrangements. Okay, let's get on to prejudging. It's Saturday, September 27th, 1975. Prejudging began at 1:30 p.m. in the Felt Forum with over 50 bodybuilding competitors from across the globe. Now, I should mention that along with the USA and World title being battled for by the men, the IFBB was also running a women's beauty pageant called the Miss Americana. This competition ran concurrently with the men's portion of the show, but before we get into the start of the show, I'd like to list off the 9 judges for the entire evening, and they were AABA governing officials Reg Harris, Harold Gibson, Andy Magna, Ed Jubenville, Dr. William Reed, IFBB Secretary Winston Roberts, Lou Ferrigno's father Matty Ferrigno, world champion wrestler and former physique giant Bruno Sammartino, and the AABA West Coast director Franco Colombo. Now, these 9 men conducted prejudging by sitting on stage along with the competitors, only just a few feet in front of them. According to most of the articles, the only issue with prejudging was that security was just a little bit too strict. The security guards on duty kept turning away photographers as they were told only judges and competitors were allowed on the stage. Actually, it got so bad that Gene Mosé, editor-in-chief of Muscle Builder and also photographer, made a scene as he refused to move when told to by security. But eventually the guards lightened up, probably ordered to, and the photographers were able to get some great coverage. Okay, let's move on to the night show. The show started at 7:30 p.m. at the Felt Forum and began with IFBB President Ben Weider giving a speech on the state of bodybuilding and how the IFBB had been helping Manila organize the World Games set for 1977. I also thought it was pretty interesting because Weider also went on to accuse the AAU of illegally and immorally running shows in the U.S. That's quite a way to start a show off. But okay, first we'll begin with the Miss Americana, which had contestants representing Canada, Puerto Rico, and the United States. And coming in third place, we had Nitza Maldonado. Coming in second place was Joanne Rougeau. And coming in first place was April Nicotara, who had actually won the same title the year prior. Also, I'd like to note that there was another title awarded in this competition, and that was the Miss Shapely Award, which went to Rosemary Hraddick. Okay, now let's move on to the men's portion of the show. For both the Mr. USA and Mr. World, all subdivision awards were scrapped and replaced with awarding 4th and 5th place with trophies for each class. Alright, let's list off the top 5 competitors from the Mr. USA's short class. Coming in 5th place was Mike Mentzer's training partner, Dave Masterakis from Granby, Massachusetts. In 4th place we had Eddie Bates of Trinidad. 3rd place went to New Yorker Annabelle Lopez, and I thought it was pretty cool to see Lopez compete in this show because at this time he was mainly competing in the AAU and WBBG. Okay, on to 2nd place, and that went to Puerto Rico's Carlos Rodriguez, who had recently transplanted to Tucson, Arizona. Carlos looked great, especially since he was on the comeback trail, but unfortunately he couldn't compare to the muscularity of 1st place winner, Danny Padilla. Hailing from Rochester, New York, Padilla stood at 5'3" and 175 pounds. He had 18.5-inch arms with 17-inch calves and a 28-inch waist, which are some very crazy measurements on such a small frame, but Padilla had recently made the jump to the IFBB as he had never really saw success in the AAU. Just a few months earlier, he had competed in the AAU Mid-East states where he placed 5th, and according to many articles, he was always overlooked because of his height. Okay, let's move on to the medium class in the Mr. USA. Coming in 5th place was Tony Roma of Boston. In 4th place, we had Mike Katz's training partner, Joe Ugalik. Coming in 3rd place was former IFBB North American champion, Rock Stonewall. 2nd place in the medium class went to the massive but still unrefined Mike Mentzer. According to some articles, Mentzer really stood out to everyone as they could see this young competitor had potential but wasn't nearly as conditioned as the 1st place winner, Roger Callard. Now, although Mentzer may have had more size, Callard was much sharper and came in with an improved midsection. Alright, now into our final category in the USA, and that's the tall class. Coming in 5th place was Barry Blennis. Coming in 4th was Dave Dupree, who had recently done well at the America, but showed up this day looking muscular but a little smooth, especially in the legs. Coming in 3rd place was Mr. East Coast Len Archambault. In 2nd place was New York's own Joe Nazario, who was representing Mid-City Gym. Nazario looked really impressive that night and made a lot of improvements since the America, but he was no match for the crowd favorite, and that was 1st place winner Denny Gable. Standing at 5'11" with 19.5-inch arms, this ex-gymnast from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, was quickly rising. The year prior, Gable had trained with Arnold in preparation for his first ever bodybuilding competition, which was the IFBB America. Arnold not only trained with him in the gym, but also helped him polish his posing routine, which really ended up paying off because Gable ended up taking home Best Poser Award and Most Muscular in this show. But in the end, the overall title of Mr. USA went to the giant killer, Danny Padilla, which actually left the audience displeased, but I can see why the judges might have given Padilla the edge. Overall, he brought the best package, and being so muscular with a tiny waist on a small frame can really make you stand out from the taller guys. Okay, now originally advertised for the evening show was a vague strength exhibition between Team USA versus Team Europe. But due to a scratch on the European team, the exhibition was off. So the promoters quickly tried to replace the European team with Team Canada, but that was also unsuccessful. So the crowd didn't seem to mind as they moved on to the main event, which was the Mr. World. Alright, so we'll start with the top 5 competitors in the short class. Coming in 5th place was Earl Sanford of St. Lucia. In 4th was Johnny Isaacs, who was actually 45 years old here, which I know is not old, but back then, trust me, they made it seem like he was a mummy. He really left quite an impression with the crowd and judges with his muscularity and vascularity. Alright, on to 3rd place, and that went to the recent Mr. Eastern America title holder, Bill Mitchell, who looked incredibly dense for his size. Very great shape, but I think could have been a little bit more conditioned. Alright, on to 2nd place, and that went to Loftus Roach of Barbados, and this is probably the best condition I've ever seen Roach in. And it makes sense because a few articles say he barely missed out on 1st. And coming in first place was Ed Giuliani, who may have not been the biggest guy in the class, but definitely the sharpest. All right, let's move on to the top 5 medium class competitors. Coming in 5th place was Stan Blinder of New York. In 4th place, we had Alex Baez of Mexico. Coming in 3rd place was Kent Kewen, representing Gold's Gym. And I thought Kent looked real good and is another one of those golden era guys that seems to be slowly fading away. With over 30 titles under his belt, like Mr. Florida and Michigan, not to mention some good showings at previous international competitions, Kent deservedly took 3rd place here. All right, on to 2nd place, and that went to AAU defector Ken Covington, and this former Teen Mr. America looked really impressive and made quite an impression with the crowd, but unfortunately was no match for the 1st place winner, and that was Robbie Robinson. At 5'7" and weighing 208 pounds with 20.5-inch upper arms, Robinson was the clear favorite from prejudging. Up to this point, Robinson had been competing for 9 years, according to an article he wrote in Muscle Builder. He had won numerous titles in the deep south of Florida, making him a legend in the area. He had also competed in the AAU's top national shows like the Mr. America. Actually, in June of this same year, 1975, Robinson competed in the AAU's Mr. America, where he placed 5th. And please stay tuned to the channel because I will definitely be covering that show. Anyway, around this time in Birmingham, Alabama, the film Stay Hungry was in production, and this is where Robinson met the IFBB's top guys, like Arnold, Ken Waller, Bob Birdsong, and so many more. And they actually convinced Robbie to make the switch from the AAU because the IFBB solely concentrated on bodybuilding, whereas the AAU kind of had their hands in many other sports. Okay, let's move on to the final class of the evening, and that's the tall class. Coming in 5th place was another crowd favorite, and that was John Romeo. 4th place went to Errol Cataroo. In 3rd place, we had Louis Sa of New York. Coming in 2nd place was Franklin Green, who looked real good, but just came up short to 1st place winner Darcy Beckles of Barbados. Representing Mid-City Gym, Beckles came in looking great and was always consistent for a bigger guy in my opinion. On top of 1st place in the tall class, Beckles took home the Best Posing Award, but unfortunately was unable to win the overall as Robbie Robinson, the Tallahassee Flash, took home the most muscular and overall title of Mr. World. In the end, these 2 new IFBB members were making names for themselves with this win, but this story doesn't end too well for Padilla. So like I said earlier, Robinson won the IFBB America back in July, which qualified him for the upcoming Universe in Pretoria, South Africa. Now, with Padilla winning the first ever Mr. USA title, he too was qualified for the Universe. But if any of you out there have ever seen Pumping Iron, we all know he never competed. So, what happened? Well, I went back and found an article written by Padilla in an issue of Muscle Builder addressing the issue. So the American team represented should have been Padilla in the short class, Robbie Robinson in the medium class, leaving an opening in the tall class. So Ken Waller and Mike Katz, who were ultimately selected, had not even won a recent show to qualify them. So right there is a huge mistake made by the U.S. Selection Committee. Padilla stated that 2 competitors should have had a pose down, and from there the tall class representative should have been picked. But according to the article, one of the competitors refused. And to make things even more hairier, Mike Katz made a statement that he had letters from the IFBB's South African committee that guaranteed him the right to compete. Now, it seems obvious to me that the Weeders knew about the heated story arc George Butler had been crafting with Waller and Katz, and they knew this would tell an interesting story, even though it would be interfering with a sport that is supposed to be based on merit. But I guess we'll cover that show some other time. Anyway, that concludes the competition, but before the night show was over, the audience was treated to 3 guest posers. First was the Sardinian Samson, Franco Colombo, who performed feats of strength like bending a 2-foot-long, 3/4-inch steel bar, and he also inflated a hot water bottle until it exploded before giving the audience a posing exhibition. Next, we had the young Olympia contender out of Brooklyn, New York, and that was Big Lou Ferrigno. At 6'5" and 275 pounds, 23-year-old Lou shocked the crowd as he hit his best poses, and according to George K., he was in 110% winning condition. Okay, on to our final guest poser that evening, and that was Larry Scott. According to a lot of these articles, this was the main reason many people came out to this show, because this was actually Scott's first posing appearance in over 9 years. At 5'9", weighing 183 pounds, Larry Scott hit his iconic poses which whipped the crowd up into a frenzy. And according to Gene Mosé, although Scott was weighing 30 pounds less than he usually did, his arms measured 19 inches cold, which is pretty impressive to me. After his posing routine, he approached the podium to give a speech thanking the Weeders and of course the fans who continued to follow him after his retirement. And he finished off the evening with a few more poses and graciously left the stage.